we'll review a book which was written in 1940s, but it is still it's important to read. It has not lost its significance. Rather, आज के सर्कमस्टांसेस में मैं देखूं तो और भी ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है कि हम सब उस किताब को पढ़ें और समझें। जब हम वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री को पढ़ते हैं तो हम देखते हैं कि कोई भी ऐसा एम्पायर, कोई भी किंगडम, कोई सिविलाइजेशन, समाज, be it Egyptian civilization, Chinese, Roman Empire, the Greeks, the British, the French, the Persian Empire, and India, of course. They all have faced external aggression, faced destruction, and at some point of time lost its political freedom as well. Now, when a civilization or an empire is, peaking up, is at its zenith, anyone critically examining the society will be targeted. कोई बर्दाश्त नहीं करेगा उसे, क्योंकि the empire is doing well, the nation is doing well. So anybody who is critically examining them will be targeted and banished. हो सकता है मार भी डालें उसे. He will be called as traitor, gaddar. But when the nation or the civil society is down and under, has faced destruction, has lost its political freedom, that is the time that this critical examination is very, very important to once again reinvigorate, re-energize the society. So this book, Discovery of India, is one such book written by Jawaharlal Nehru in 40s, which has critically examined the Indian society, the Indian civilization, to re-energize itself. It's kind of a SWOT analysis. And it was written when we had lost our political freedom. That was in 1940s. This book has around 625 pages, divided into 10 chapters, which are further divided into certain sections. It's by and large in sequence, because that sequence is very important, because the author wants us, the reader, to discover India. How it has grown, how our socio-political and economic thoughts have developed over a period of thousands of years. It's a must-read book. So this book is like our, SWOT analysis of the Indian society, the Indian civilization, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities that are lying, to regain our political freedom. Because it was written in 40s. When we were still, ruled by an alien government. So the opportunities that are there to regain our political freedom, the threats that are there, that we may not be able, even if we regain the political freedom, we may lose it, right? Or we may not get it at all. So it's a SWOT analysis. And therefore, when talking about the strengths and the grey areas, the author goes back to ancient India, right? When we were peaking, when we were at our zenith, the Vedas, what is in Vedas? What encouraged, what drove that society, right? The Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata, the 6 schools of Indian philosophy. So in one book, one would find everything. Many of us have not written Vedas, read Vedas or Upanishads, but here in one book we would find everything. What is given in Vedas? What are its strengths? How the ancient Indians were inspired to achieve all this, right? To write such scriptures. Now, it would be, so Jawaharlal Nehru points out, he quotes Max Muller, who in his lecture in 1880s at Cambridge University, during his lecture he said, if I were asked, under what sky the human mind has most fully developed some of its choicest gifts, has most deeply pondered on the greatest problems of life, and has found solutions of some of them which well deserve the attention even of those who have studied Plato, I should point to India. And he goes on further. I'm just quoting of just one few lines. In Nasiddha Sutta of Rigveda, it's of 7 shlokas. 7 shlokas are there in that. The 7th one is very, very important, which tells us उस समय के हमारे forefathers थे, वो कितने inquisitive थे, right? That they even questioned the God. I'll read out the last one which Jawaharlal Nehru quotes when the Nasiddha Sutta. It says, whence all creation had its origin, the Creator, whether He fashioned it or whether He did not. कि क्रिएटर कौन है वाली? ब्रह्मा. तो क्या ब्रह्मा ने बनाया था ये सब या उसने नहीं बनाया? The Creator who surveys it all from highest heaven, He knows it, or maybe even He does not know it. तो जिसको हम बोलते हैं कि सर्वज्ञानी है, सर्वव्यापी है, क्या उसने ये सब बनाया? उसको क्या मालूम है या उसको भी नहीं मालूम है कि ये सब किसने बनाया? So even the God has been questioned, and this is the level to which our forefathers had gone. What sense of inquisitiveness they had, right? And here today we are fighting कि हमारे भगवान की इंसल्ट कर दी, हमारे देवता की इंसल्ट कर दी. So while discussing the Upanishads, which are written in around from 800 BC to 1st century or 2nd century Common Era CE, he says that Upanishads were written when the society was no longer satisfied by the Vedic gods, and rituals were mocked at, right? And so Upanishads are an attempt, are an instinct with a spirit of inquiry, of mental adventure, of a passion for finding out the truth. However, there was no attempt to break from the past. The past was always the start point, that is the Vedas, right? And he quotes, these Upanishads, he says there was a sense of adventure, there was a confidence to find the truth. And he quotes, and one shlok from Mundaka Upanishad, would tell us कि हमारे एंशिएंट इंडियंस में कितना कॉन्फिडेंस था. और ये जवाहरलाल नेहरू किस कॉन्फिडेंस की बात कर रहे थे, किस इंक्वायरी की बात कर रहे थे. So this shlok from Mundaka Upanishad says like this, he quotes, O son of refulgent glory, I am the same person as he that is in you. हे सूर्य, जो तुझ में है वो मुझ में भी है. What a superb self-confidence. He further quotes a very famous scholar, Bloomfield, who said, there is no important form of Hindu thought, including Buddhism, which is not rooted in the Upanishads. So Upanishads are so important. However, the saddest part was that Upanishads, what is given in Upanishads, were never comprehended by the masses, but was restricted, its learning or its teaching were restricted to only to the few elites. Because education in those days, we all know, was monopolized. Right? Similarly, while appreciating the Mahabharata, he says Mahabharata gives a fair idea of the political and economic environment that existed then. Together with Bhagavad Gita, it laid importance to dharma, that is the duty, the responsibility, without which there is no true happiness and society cannot hold itself together. He then goes on quoting Sister Nivedita, Margaret Noble, who was the disciple of Swami Vivekananda. She said, and Jawaharlal Nehru quotes in his book, The Discovery of India, the foreign reader is at once struck by two features of Mahabharata. In the first place, its unity in complexity, and in the second, its constant effort to impress upon its hearers the idea of a single centralized India with its heroic traditions. So in this one book, The Discovery of India, the reader would find everything, the Veda, the Upanishads, what is written in them, how the society has developed over a period of time, how our thoughts, political and social thoughts, have developed over a period of time, or the thousands of years. Jawaharlal Nehru, while discussing the growth and the decline of Indian civilization in one of the chapters, quotes Dr. Radhakrishnan, who was then a renowned Indian philosopher and had written extensively on Indian civilization. So Dr. Radhakrishnan says, and Nehruji mentions in his book Discovery of India, said that Indian philosophy lost its vigor after it lost its political freedom. Jawaharlal Nehru goes further. He says such a developed civilization, an Indian civilization which is much more superior than its counterparts elsewhere, such a huge civilization could lose its political freedom unless there was an internal decay. And then he vindicates this point. He says Rome, before it was destroyed by the external aggression from the north, its institutions were on the verge of collapse. They had already decayed. Now to point this out, he says the last Indian philosopher, great Indian philosopher, was Shankaracharya in the 8th century. And the last Indian great scientist that India produced was Bhaskara too, in around 11th, 12th century. So there was a decay which might have carried on for centuries. So there was an internal decay, and that's why we lost our political freedom, because of this internal decay. So when we read this book, we find what were the causes of this decay that was taking place. And some hint we get from the writings of other foreign travelers like Al-Biruni, who came to India with Mahmud Ghazni. Now it's surprising, somebody like Mahmud Ghazni, who did not come with a huge force, but he came number of times, looted and went back. So without much opposition. And so Al-Biruni writes in his book, which he wrote about India, he said, the Indians are stolid and stupid. They think their king is the best, their science is the best, their culture is the best. So we became status quoists. We thought we are the best. Right? So some hint we get of this decay, why this decay was taking place. While going through this book, one would automatically realize as to how we became over a period of time individualistic in nature. inward looking. Despite Mahabharata and Gita telling us or emphasizing upon social welfare and social responsibilities, how Sanskrit, such a developed language, became turned into only a language of elites and not of masses. How casteism impacted us, how monopolization of education impacted the society. And then one learns about the Mauryan dynasty, the Gupta dynasty, and many more dynasties that came, the famous scientists that India gave. Right? And then he moves on to his own era, right? His own, the period, the era in which he was living, and his own concerns, their concerns rather, the social society's concerns that time in which he lived. So he discusses about the Britishers, how they came, and how they succeeded, and thereafter he discusses about the Great Revolt of 1857, and he highlights two very important aspects. And the first one, he says, one should see who were the main actors of that, who participated in that. Although it might have started with the Sepoy movement, but who were the major actors? They were all kings and queens and feudal lords. They were not fighting for India or Bharat. They were fighting for their own vested interest, their own kingdoms, which was being threatened by the British laws. झांसी की रानी ने ये नहीं बोला था कि मैं भारत नहीं दूंगी. She said, मैं अपनी झांसी नहीं दूंगी. So imagine, had those kings and queens and feudal lords succeeded in driving out the Britishers, हमारे देश का क्या शेप होती? The second important aspect arises from this is, he says, our concern is what kind of people would be replacing the Britishers whenever they leave, because when he was writing this book, he did not know कि Britishers कब जाएंगे और कब आज़ादी मिलेगी. But the concern was there, what kind of people would be replacing? What if these feudal lords come back? What kind of country we would get? And वो किस तरह के लोग होंगे जो ब्रिटिशर्स को के जगह पे आएंगे? This was a major cause of concern. None of us have seen Jawaharlal Nehru or worked with him. All we know about him is through WhatsApp. Right? This book gives a hint, an idea as to what kind of a person he was. What were his views on various aspects of life. And going through this book, I realized that why now he is being hated. He says, religion as I saw it practiced and accepted even by thinking minds, whether it was Hinduism or Islam or Buddhism or Christianity, did not attract me. It seemed to be closely associated with superstitious practices and dogmatic beliefs, and behind it lay a method of approach to life's problems which was certainly not that of science. There was an element of magic about it, an uncritical credulousness, a reliance on the supernatural. So he was not a religious man, right? And science attracted him. He then goes on to say, religion merges into mysticism and metaphysics and philosophy, whose domain is now shrinking because of the science. Science may not be able to tell us much, or for that matter, of that anything about the purpose of life, but it is now widening its boundaries, and philosophy's domain is shrinking. He says mysticism irritates me. He says mysticism irritates him. It appears to be vague and soft. He goes on to say, essentially I am interested in this world, in this life, not in some other world or a future life. Whether there is such a thing as a soul or whether there is a survival after death or not, I do not know and I care little about it. They do not trouble me in the least. The environment in which I have grown up takes the soul, or rather the Atma and a future life, the karma theory of cause and effect and reincarnation for granted. I have been affected by this, and so in a sense I am favorably disposed towards these assumptions. So he calls them as assumptions. There is no scientific basis behind it that Atma hai or Punarjanm hai. There is no scientific evidence even now. So now he says, space, time, the quantum theory have utterly changed the picture of the physical world. More recent researches into the nature of matter, the structure of the atom, the transmutation of the elements, and the transformation of electricity and light, either into the other, have carried human knowledge much further. Man no longer sees nature as something apart and distinct from himself. Human destiny appears to become a part of nature's rhythmic energy. He says, I am convinced that the methods and approach of science have revolutionized human life more than anything else in the long course of history, and has opened doors and avenues of further and even more radical change leading up to the very portals of what has been considered the unknown. So no wonder when he became the Prime Minister, he started encouraging developing scientific temperament, and it was included in the Constitution. Scientific temperament for him, he says, is not about studying physics, chemistry. It's about asking questions, seeking answers, rather than without logic, without questioning, just following your beliefs and faith. Right? So this book is a must read for Indians, so that हम भी अपने बच्चों को इनकरेज करें कि वो क्वेश्चन पूछें, जैसे नसद्य सूक्ता में डाउट आस्क क्वेश्चंस कि ये सृष्टि किसने बनाई, क्या जिसने बनाई उसको मालूम है कि उसने बनाई या किसी और ने बनाई. थैंक यू जेंटलमैन. जय हिंद.